Hey gang, it's Stuart. I hope if you're somewhere in the eastern US that you're staying warm. The wind's kind of howling outside the studio at the moment. I hope it's not too obvious. Based on some feedback from my series on the select menu, I wanted to talk a little bit about mute and solo, and I think this is going to be a good place to start a little mini series on the track control panel. Let's jump over to Audacity. And the track control panel is this block at the left end of every track. I've got these collapsed to only show mute and solo because I'm going to focus on those this time, but if the track's a normal height, then you'll see all of the controls. And if we collapse it down, then we can hide everything except for what we want to talk about today, which is mute and solo. So mute and solo are somewhat self-explanatory, but there's sometimes a little bit of confusion. So let's talk real quick about what's going on. I've got 3 tracks here. I've got a narration, an owl sound effect, and a storm sound effect, and we'll just take a quick listen.
It was a dark and stormy night. The rain fell in torrents.
And you can hear all that stuff going together. We can listen to individual tracks by muting other tracks. So if we use the mute button and we just mute, let's say I just take out the narration and I go back to the beginning and play, then you just hear the storm and the owl. Right? That makes sense. And if I mute the storm, then we only hear, after a little bit of silence here, we'll get over to where our owl makes his presence known. So mute for each track does not affect any of the other tracks, and you can mute any number of tracks that you want and turn them back on by turning off mute. Okay. There's also, if you go up into the tracks menu, there's options for mute and unmute, to mute all, unmute all, and then mute tracks and unmute tracks are for if you have one or more tracks selected. So if I have this track and then I hold down Command or Control and select this track, I can go into the tracks menu and do mute those 2 tracks, and it mutes only the ones that are selected, right? And the same thing for unmute tracks, it's only for the ones that are selected, right? Okay, so now we get to solo, and this is where sometimes people get a little bit confused. Solo is often interpreted as mute everything except for this track. And if you solo one track, that's what it sounds like.
It was a dark and stormy night.
But here's where the trick comes in. In some digital audio workstations or DAWs, solo works kind of like the radio buttons on a car radio, where if you punch one, it unselects all the others. So solo really does mean solo only this track. In Audacity, though, it works much like a mixer board works, and that's kind of where the heritage of Audacity came from. So solo doesn't mean turn off everything else. It means add this track to the group that's allowed to play. It doesn't have anything to do with the mute button. So even though it's saying allow this track to play, it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not mute is turned off or on. And we'll see that here in a second. So I can select more than one track to solo. If I select these 2, for example,
it was a dark and stormy night. The rain fell in torrents.
In the queue, right? If we solo the owl and the storm, then there's our storm, and when we get over here, the owl comes in, he gets his say as well. Okay, but none of the solo settings have anything to do with whether a track is muted. Right, so if I mute everything and then I go say solo this, it's going to do that. Turning on solo will say I'm going to play this. Solo overrides mute. Okay, so even though I have everything muted, if I solo these 2 tracks, then you notice that they turn on. So I get my narration.
It was a dark and stormy night.
Time comes to come in over here.
The rain fell in.
Okay, so solo overrides mute. And there's also no equivalent to the mute and unmute controls on the tracks menu. So if you solo more than one thing, then you have to go and clear those solos individually on the tracks that you've set solo on. Okay, so this is where you tend to use solo sparingly, and it's usually used in the context of needing to do a quick check on something. So if you're over in a section of audio, let's say I'm right here where I'm supposed to hear that owl.
The
If I play
rain
this and
fell
something sounds a
in
little bit odd, now
torrents.
I just want to hear the owl. I can solo the owl real quickly, play just that track, and then go on with what I'm doing in terms of putting together my list of tracks. Okay, so the thing to keep in mind is that solo and mute are not connected in any way, and solo overrides mute. I'm Stuart. Hope this helps.